Welcome everyone to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today on December 13th, a Friday here to round out the week. We are a day removed from the start of Week 15. A lackluster, performance yesterday, I think just from all the hype that we had around it. But still, we got a result, so we got to talk about it. The Rams getting a big win over the San Francisco 49ers. Also, we got part 2 of our game picks coming up on today's show, and just some general news around the NFL, all jumbled up into a segment while also talking about some other stories down the line as well, all on today's show, so make sure to stick around. But before we get started talking about last night's game, I'd like to give you guys the opportunity of being involved with the show. If you guys have any questions, comments, or any opinions you'd want to share regarding anything we talk about, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight into anything is always appreciated, and it's always welcomed here, not only to get what you guys are talking about, but also, adding to the conversation as well. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out, again, whatever it could be, you're able to do that now with the new feature, with the Super Chat feature. Just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box, you're able to send in your Super Chat. And this way, it absolutely guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's a fantastic way to support our channel. And we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we always appreciate it whenever you guys are able to do that. So again, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button. Get involved with the program. Hit the $ at the bottom of the chat box and get involved. Let us know what you're thinking on our live shows. But with that being said, now we could start going over what we saw yesterday, basically, in that Rams game. And like I said, we might have overhyped it a little bit just because, these are two great teams. You're not always going to see 40-something to 40-something like the Rams were involved in, right? But last night might have been the lowest scoring game of the entire year. Definitely up there with the most boring. Just if you don't really like defense, it might not have been the game for you. I watched it just because I was holding out hope that we could see something, hopefully in the second half. But unfortunately, it never came. But we had to get a winner, and that was the Los Angeles Rams. They ended up winning the game 12-6, 4 field goals to 2 field goals, basically, in favor of them. And in the end, this has been the only game without a touchdown all year. And I guess it does make sense just because the NFC West has been so tight throughout the entire year, right? There's been a period where the Cardinals were first place. Now the Seahawks are in first place. Everybody thought the 49ers were going to win it. The Rams were always there. I don't think people were picking them to win necessarily, but we knew that they were going to be a formidable team. And now the road has really narrowed after a game like this, because the win for the Los Angeles Rams brings them to 8-6 on the year now, and it's their 7th win in their last 9 games. And it moves them within a half a game of the Seattle Seahawks for first place in the division. And it's also, I think with it being so heavily based on defense, I thought it was a pretty good sign for that defense, right? Because in the previous games, against the Saints, not so much, but against the Eagles, they gave up 37, and against the Buffalo Bills, they gave up 42. So now to go on the road against a desperate 49ers team, to have their defense show out like that, that's a positive you can take away from the performance, right? Of course, you don't want to put up 12 points, but you could look at it as, the glass half full and be pretty satisfied that your defense, responded and only gave up 6 points. So not only that, with the win, obviously, they're 8-6 now, but it puts more pressure on the Seahawks now that they are going to play Green Bay, I believe, at home. So with that being the case, it puts a lot of pressure on them, because if they lose, now they have the same record as the Rams, and they still got to play each other as the last game of the season. So the Seahawks got a lot on their plate coming up this Sunday. But then on the other side, we got to talk about the 49ers, and now they're 6-8, the opposite record of the Rams, and all about, all but out of the playoffs now, pretty much for the 49ers. I don't know if they're mathematically, officially, 100% eliminated, but I wasn't very high on them really since McCaffrey re-injured his knee, and the performances against the Packers and the Bills really said everything that I needed to know, because they haven't been a team over 500 yet on the season, and they're running out of time. Basically, they've ran out of time, so it's really just not. It's not been the season for them. They've dealt with a lot, on and off the field, which we're going to get to in this game. But really, this time around, it was the fourth time this season that San Francisco has lost to a divisional opponent after leading by 3+ points in the fourth quarter. So that's obviously significant because of the fact that you got to beat your divisional opponents, one, but especially at home, right? The home games are supposed to be your advantage. You can't be losing about all of them now, right? Based on the stats. So that's obviously huge. And Fred Warner talked about it too after the game, where he said their inability to close out games and just not feeling like they're good enough really in these big moments. They don't play complimentary football towards the end of the games, where they might need their defense to come up with a stop like last night, or they need their offense to put up points and things like that, or again, going back to their defense, where they've given up comebacks like I just mentioned in those fourth quarters. Things have usually not swung their way, so that's been very disappointing. Fred Warner talked about it. And also, now looking at San Francisco, San Francisco has lost every home game against divisional opponents so far this year. They've split with the Seattle Seahawks. They beat the Seahawks in Seattle, but then lost at home to them. They still got to play Arizona at Arizona, but the Cardinals already beat them in San Francisco, and the Rams just swept them. So, again, very rough go of it. And there's not really too much to talk about in the breakdown of the game, other than the fact that the game really started to kind of turn when the Rams hit that big play to start the fourth quarter, that 51-yard pass to Puka Nacua, which set up a field goal, which gave them the lead 9-6. And when the 49ers had an opportunity to tie this game, Brock Purdy threw an interception. The double move didn't really work, and he threw an interception basically in the end zone. And then the Rams put together a 13-play, 69-yard drive to basically ice the game with another field goal and end up winning 12-6. And there was a couple things I wanted to talk about outside of just the result, because I think the overarching thing that I really took away from the game was how this was just like the ultimate final nail in the coffin for a very just nightmarish season for the 49ers. You can't even begin to list out the things that they've dealt with this year, apart from the injuries and all the other crazy things that they've had to deal with. But in this game, we saw the offense played poorly, obviously, but Deebo was a big talking point going into this game. He was frustrated with the lack of attention, lack of targets. He was complaining about getting the ball more, and he made it pretty evident. So with that in mind, if you're going to do that, you're going to fully buy into kind of saying it and outing it in front of the media. The next game, you better have a massive impact in the game and have one of your better games. But that really wasn't the case for him last night, because he was targeted the second most amount of times among all receivers. He was targeted 7 times, along with George Kittle. Juwan Jennings led everybody with 9. But Deebo only finished with 3 receptions for 16 yards. And really, everyone's going to talk about the drop that he had on a 3rd and down in the red zone. I believe on their first drive of the second half, where it was 3rd and 10. They were in the red zone. He had a nice slant move. It was a great call. He beat man coverage, and he was as open as you could even get on a slant route. Brock Purdy put it right at, lower chest, upper abdomen level, and Deebo just simply dropped it. He kind of looked ahead and didn't really see the ball into his arms, and he dropped it. They didn't convert the first down, obviously, and some of the boos started raining down. So I thought that was pretty significant, because at that point, I felt like it was so demoralizing. At that point, the score was only going to be 6-3 then, but for Deebo to come in and complain like he did, and then have a drop like that and really not make a huge impact, that touchdown potentially could have changed the entire game. So the fact that he dropped it, again, I think just adds more insult to injury to the kind of season the 49ers have had. But we have to mention also the biggest piece of news was Devondre Campbell, the linebacker for the 49ers, obviously. Apparently, Kyle Shanahan mentioned after the game that he pretty much tried to get Devondre Campbell to go back into the game because Drake Greenlaw got hurt, and Devondre Campbell said basically that he didn't want to, and then he just walked off the field and back to the locker room, essentially quitting on his team, quitting on the fan base, the organization, everybody, because you presume there was some hurt feelings, I guess, about the fact that, Drake Greenlaw just came back and that Devondre Campbell was going to be the one to be benched. He probably thought that was a little bit unfair, but, you got to, tame the expectations a little bit, right? For Devondre Campbell, and he's very much in his own right to think that he should be starting, but, you got to know the situation a little bit, right? You know how much Drake Greenlaw means to this team and really how much he's revered. So you know that it's him and Fred. It's him and Fred as the starters. So it was always going to be almost impossible, and it sounds a bit unfair the way I say it, but it's reality, right? This was his team, him and Fred's team, and they were playing great in the first half, It's not like Drake came back and he was suffering and, still Devondre Campbell wasn't playing. Dre was balling out. The 49ers were playing great on defense, and the Rams, there was a reason why they didn't get a first down in their first 4 or 5 drives or something like that. Dre was playing well, but the fact that you still dressed and, had the responsibility to yourself, to your team, to the organization, and to the fans that if you're going to dress, you should be ready to play. And the fact that he, just kind of threw in the towel, and I'm pretty sure the 49ers cut him, I think just today in the afternoon, but that was extremely disappointing, and it was so, I can't even put myself in the shoes of the other 49ers players, because I thought it was such a great point where people brought up the fact that this team specifically is not the team to kind of do something like that, because I mentioned all the stuff they've gone through. Christian McCaffrey has battled back from injury, and he re-injured himself. He would do anything to be out there for Devondre Campbell to just kind of throw that opportunity away. Then you look at Brandon Ayuk, tore his ACL. Again, another player that would do anything to be out there, but he can't. Trent Williams, same thing. He's trying to battle back from injury. Nick Bosa just came back from injury to play in this game, so they don't really need that. And you want to talk about even more personal things. You want to talk about Trevarius Ward and how he lost his daughter this year, and it would have been perfectly fine for him not to come back, because you can't even imagine what that's like, right, as a player and trying to deal with that. But he put the team first, trying to bring them, back into playoff contention and things like that. So for him to still be out there and playing out there, and then have this guy, Campbell, not, value that and really value what his teammates are doing, it's insane to even think about, and, putting it in those terms. Ricky Pearsall, the rookie, first year, no NFL experience, no real ties with this team yet, right, in his first year. He was shot in the beginning of the season, and he's still out there. So for Devondre Campbell to kind of take all of that and just really, turn his head the other way and just quit on this team where they're, battling, everybody still has hope to make the playoffs. But for him to do something like that really didn't sit well with me. It was pretty uncomfortable, and obviously not what you want to see. So the 49ers cut him, and it's just I don't want to say it's been that kind of season, because something like that is just inexplicable, but it's been hurdle after hurdle after hurdle for the 49ers. So that really culminated everything there in the end, and they ended up losing the game. So it was a pretty hard watch as a fan, but also seeing what happened afterwards, really, it was just inexcusable from Devondre Campbell. So that was how it all ended up, and just culminated for the 49ers, unfortunately. So the Rams get a big win, and now they move on with the rest of the season. And for us, talking about moving on, we're going to move on to our next topic here, looking at our game picks, the rest of them, for Week 15. We'll be right back with that after this break.
Feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit, I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant, I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast here on a Friday, December 13th. We're going to jump right back into our game picks that we didn't finish yesterday. Only for time's sake, I think it's better to just kind of split it up. So we have to get to the remaining 6 games that we didn't talk about yesterday. And we left off on the Bengals and Titans game. We don't see the Bills and Lions game on here because we isolated that one on Wednesday. Because it was such a huge game, I wanted to talk about it more in depth, so, that's why it's not mentioned on here, right? We already essentially previewed that game. So, starting off with the left side of things, the Bengals traveled to Tennessee to take on the Titans. An interesting, kind of storyline here because Brian Callahan is the head coach of the Titans. He came over from the Cincinnati Bengals as their former offensive coordinator now, so a bit of a reunion there. And I think for both of these teams, it's kind of interesting because I was pretty high on the Titans, and I just figured the Bengals were going to be good anyway. But it's been pretty disappointing for both of them, obviously, because the Titans have one of the worst records, obviously, at 3-10, and just haven't really found much consistency from anywhere on offense. Will Levis has really been, I'll say up and down, but it's really been more down than there has been ups. And their defense has been pretty well coached, and they've performed pretty well in some aspect. But you're just not really getting anything from that offense. And DeAndre Hopkins was traded away, so it's been a struggle that way, obviously. So from that point, then you look at the Bengals, and it's kind of the opposite, the complete opposite with them, where their defense really hasn't given you much all year. But their offense is really just scoring at will, it seems like, with Joe and Jamar Chase having historical seasons for them, but they still have a losing record. So very lackluster, very underwhelming season for both of them. But in terms of this game, how I see them matching up, the Titans, I think, are just focused on other things, not just really winning games. And the Bengals, are still technically fighting for the playoffs. So I'm going to take the Bengals here. I think with a loss, the Bengals would officially be eliminated, so they're going to have a little bit extra motivation going into this game. So give me the Bengals to win on the road against their former offensive coordinator. Then we move down one spot. In this game, probably like 3 weeks ago, I was probably not even going to talk too much about this game, but then I started thinking this morning when I knew I had to talk about it. And it's funny because both of these teams last met in 2020, actually in the playoffs, when the Browns eliminated the Steelers on the road, and then they traveled to Kansas City and, were in a pretty close game with the Chiefs. They ended up losing 22-17, but in that point in time in history, I think people were starting to look at the Browns as, they might be starting to turn a corner here, right? It looks like they have their quarterback in Baker Mayfield. They just went toe-to-toe with the Chiefs, it seems like. This could be the beginning of, their story arc, basically, right? This could be where they take this starting point and then just build on it for years to come, right? But obviously, it's been everything but that, right? Because Baker moved on. This team's defense has still pretty much stayed together, but the quarterback and the offense really haven't been there at all for this team. So while the Chiefs, obviously we know what they've gone through, right, and how successful they've been. So now this time around, the Chiefs are going to be taking on Jameis Winston in this game and going up against Patrick Mahomes. And I think it's interesting, too, because not only has Cleveland lost their last 2 games, but they've shown, all their deficiencies, right, with the turnovers and, the inconsistencies on offense as well, right? It's not always, a steady thing to ride, basically, right? With Jameis, the gunslinger in him, it's not always the thing that you can expect, the same kind of result, positive and negative, any given day. So, you got to live and die with that, obviously, but there's obviously some downsides, like the turnovers. But I think it would be so funny and just so, like just epitomizing this season if the Chiefs traveled to Cleveland, and for some reason this game was close. I expected it to be close because all the Chiefs games are close. And wouldn't it be just great if the Browns finished with a losing record, but 3 out of their potential 4 wins would be at home against the Steelers, at home against the Ravens, and then at home against the Chiefs? Wouldn't that just be like the most randomest, trivia fact you're going to hear in like 5 to 6 years or something like that? And that's why I'm going to go with Cleveland to win this game. At home, I think they definitely play better. The high-scoring game against Denver, that was in Denver. They just lost to the Steelers in Pittsburgh. But at home, there's something, I think, just playing at home for them. With all those fans, they don't care that they have a losing record. They're going to go there, be rowdy, and, try their best to get, some sort of an advantage over the other team. And it's not like the Browns are awful. Like, they have, decent players, but it's just not really worked out this year. And, you want to start with Myles Garrett, and going at that left side of the Chiefs' offensive line. The offensive line for the Chiefs hasn't been great really all year, and now you face a monster like Myles Garrett. That's a pretty big, disadvantage, I would say. And they have pretty good corners, Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, Emerson, and, those guys on the back end, they're pretty good in man coverage, so they're able to bring a lot of pressure at Patrick, and I think that could be a solid formula for them. And also they're going to have to be extremely lucky and get every bounce, but I think I'm going to go with Cleveland just for the storyline, the plot, and for Jameis Winston to continue to be a living legend as he is. So I'm going to go with Cleveland in this one to upset the Chiefs. Then Miami and Houston is an interesting matchup because it's a clinching scenario for the Texans, because if the Texans win and the Colts lose to Denver as well, the Texans would secure the AFC South for the second year in a row. But Miami's not just going to lay down either. They've been pretty tricky this year, and, they're playing inside, in Houston, obviously, so the Dolphins don't have to worry about that, and it's looked pretty good. They've won 4 of their last 5 games, whereas Houston has been in a lot of close games, and they've won 2 of their last 5. So they really haven't had the luck, potentially, in these close games, and something always feels like it's either missing or it's just not clicking with the Texans, in my opinion, right? When I've watched them, I feel like they should be a lot better than they are, and I don't know if it's the youth or what, but it feels like they should be a lot more comfortable in some of these games, but they just haven't been. But I think I'm still going to go with the Texans because I am unsure about them, again, because I was super high on them, if you guys remember, at the beginning of the year. But in this game, the Dolphins do worry me a little bit, but I just saw the Jets, have a decent control over the Dolphins in their last game, and, the Jets just don't really close games out very well, so I think that was, a big part of it. But I think Houston, with the kind of running game that they have, and still, they're just as good as the Jets, and it sounds like an oxymoron because the Jets don't have a good record, but you guys know what I mean. Like, they have the same amount of good players, if not a lot better players than the Jets. So if the Jets could get out to a lead on the Dolphins, I think the Texans could too, at home especially. And if they could keep the turnovers down, I think the Houston Texans can win this game. It's going to be close, but I like Joe Mixon to kind of keep the pace of this game for the Texans. Then moving on to the other side, the Colts and the Broncos. A matchup of a couple horses, I guess, right? Colts and Broncos, right? Broncos definitely. I guess Colts are the same thing. But anyway, in reality, the last spot in the wild card, we got the last spot in the wild card round going up against the team that's in 8th place. And the Broncos right now are the 7th seed in the AFC, and the Colts are right on their heels to try and steal that spot away from them, essentially. And that obviously adds a lot more incentive. And you also want to add another thing that we're going to mention with the Chargers. The Chargers and the the Chargers and the Broncos have the same record. They're both 8-5. So in a scenario where the Chargers lose, 8-6, right? The Broncos lose, right? 8-6. And then the Colts, if the Colts were to win, give me a second here. If the Colts were to win and they're one spot away from entering, the playoffs essentially in the AFC, if the Colts win, they would be 7-7. And the Broncos would be 8-6, and the Chargers would be 8-6. So the Colts would only be one game away from both of those teams, really amping up the pressure over the course of these last couple weeks. So that's obviously a scenario that could happen. And, it would be directly affecting a direct competitor, right, for one of the last spots in the wild card round. So that's obviously a lot of pressure, and for the Colts also to not lose the division right away, also with the Texans, right? They want to keep pace with them as well. But with all that being said, I'm going to go with the Broncos because I'd love to see Indy win, right? But I don't know if I could really trust Anthony Richardson in this game as a passer because I feel like that defense is going to get after him, and he's playing better. I like that he's playing better, and he's really convinced a lot of people, including myself. But, that Broncos defense is really good. Like, they create turnovers, they pressure the quarterback and things like that. They don't really allow a lot of, big runs and things like that also. So you're going to have to depend on Anthony Richardson's arm, and I don't think I'm prepared to do that yet. So I think it's just too much to ask, and I'm going to go with the Broncos in that game. Then we look at this other game, the Patriots at the Arizona Cardinals. Both teams are on a 3-game losing streak. Kyler's performances have been worrying a little bit over the course of this losing streak because it's just been too many turnovers in bad moments also. And on the side of New England, they've been in pretty close games, 2 out of their last 3. But overall, I think Arizona has been good enough to win these types of games. The games that they've lost, they've been in there, but, it's going back to the turnovers with Kyler and, throwing them at bad points where either the game gets away from you or it's a big point in the game where the game's tight and you throw an interception or something like that. So, they've been right there, but they've just lost all the big moments currently. But I think that ends in this game. I like Arizona because they just have a more talented team. The Patriots are still, in the infant stage of this process. So the Cardinals are a little bit more advanced. I expect Kyler to kind of keep the turnovers down, play a lot cleaner, and come away with this game. So I'm going to go with the Cardinals. And then lastly here, I got the Chargers and the Buccaneers. A lot of playoff implications here because the Buccaneers are trying to hold on to first place in the NFC South. They just got first place over the Falcons, so they want to keep that lead over them. And the same thing for the Chargers. They have the same record as the Broncos, so if the Broncos were to win, like I predicted, and the Chargers were to lose, then the Broncos would actually jump over them, and they would be the 6th seed, and the Chargers would be the 7th seed, traveling to Buffalo instead of potentially traveling to Houston or Pittsburgh, right? That's a big difference. The Bills haven't lost at home yet, so that's obviously huge. You want to have the best possible seed, and this is a pretty interesting matchup between both of them. The Chargers are coming off of a tough loss to the Chiefs, while the Buccaneers are feeling pretty good because they've been on a little winning streak. They regained first place, like I said, and they're playing pretty well. Despite the loss, though, the way the Chargers are competing, and that I saw them compete against the Chiefs in Arrowhead, was pretty reassuring to me, even without Ladd McConkey, who I expect to be back this week. This is also the last test for the Buccaneers. The last real test, because the rest of their games are against teams with losing records. So this is the last kind of difficult game that the Buccaneers are going to have to play, and I feel like I'm leaning more towards the Chargers because of that. They don't want to drop to the 7th seed, and the addition of Ladd McConkey and the fact that Justin Herbert never throws interceptions and plays a really efficient game, I think is just a bit more of a higher level of execution that can get them over the line than the Buccaneers. I think the Bucs sometimes have their moments where they go a little bit cold on offense, and the Chargers defense is very good. So I'd like them matching up against the Chargers in this one. So I'm going to go with the Chargers. I think they have enough. Ladd McConkey's going to come back, and I think it's going to make a big difference in this game. So those are all of our picks for Week 15. It should be another entertaining weekend of football. So with that being said, and talking about the league and the NFL, obviously, we're going to come back and talk about a couple stories that are worth mentioning. There was a few of them, so I kind of wanted to include them in this one episode. So we're going to talk about the fact that OBJ got cut today from the Miami Dolphins. KJ Osborne was signed with the Washington Commanders. Hollywood Brown returned to the Kansas City Chiefs, and he should have been practicing with them this week. All of that, we're going to give you guys more insight into when we return right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, we are back here on the show to kind of go over a few stories that I thought were worth mentioning on today's show because they were pretty impactful, not only for this week, but potentially going forward for a couple of these teams. So the first piece of news that we got really this morning was the fact that the Dolphins and wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. mutually agreed to part ways at this point in the year. OBJ is expected to clear waivers and look for another opportunity with a different team. Obviously, he's expected to clear waivers by Monday, then sign with any other team, obviously, in the NFL. And right away, the Rams, and maybe surprisingly to some people, I think the Eagles would be an interesting place for him to go. He's not going anywhere to be anybody's number one, obviously, and I'm sure he's going to be looking for, a decent opportunity to compete in the playoffs. So I think the Rams, one, are familiar with him. Obviously, they won a Super Bowl with him. And the Eagles, Smitty and A.J. Brown have been great. And the fact that I'm not sure if they have Jahan Dotson, I think is a worry. I'm pretty sure they do, but I really have not heard too much from him in terms of contributing. So I think that's an area where they could bring in someone like Odell. I mean, it could seem unnecessary, but if they absolutely need someone, and they think that bringing in someone from the outside can help them, why not Odell? If anything, he's going to do just as much as Jahan Dotson's doing. So it can't really hurt too much, especially if it's on, the absolute minimum. So I think those two would be interesting destinations for Odell as well. And just basically, it didn't fit in Miami, I think, for a couple reasons, not just because he was behind Tyreek and Waddle, but I think the system also with Mike McDaniel is pretty complicated, honestly. I don't know from personal experience, right, obviously, but it feels like everything is very much timing-oriented, spacing, motions, and, manipulation and everything like that. You got to be on your X's and O's in layman's terms, right? You got to know not only what you're supposed to do, but the timing of how this guy's breaking on his route and how it affects your route and how you might set a pick for him and things like that. So I think that, combined with the fact that Odell had to miss about a month into the season because of an injury, those two didn't really mix. He was probably, not fully integrated into the system quite as much as he would have liked or as the Dolphins would have liked. So it just really wasn't a fit. He tried to get on a moving train, and it just didn't end up working out. So he has another opportunity here to kind of try and find a new home with somebody here late in the year. He finished his time there in Miami with 9 receptions for 55 yards as well. No receiving touchdowns for Odell in Miami. So we shall see where Odell ends up over, the next week or two. I can't imagine it'll take too long, but you never know. And moving from one wide receiver now to another one, I had to mention KJ Osborne. If you guys are unaware of KJ Osborne, he previously was with the New England Patriots last season, and he was a free agent going into this year. He was with the Minnesota Vikings. Then he signed with the Patriots this year. In a new era, obviously, right? Post-Bill Belichick, Gerard Mayo, Jacoby Brissett there now as the quarterback. But things didn't really work out for him very much this season, if at all. Not really involved, not really out there playing too much either. So the Patriots and KJ Osborne, they split ways. Obviously, they parted ways on Monday, and just today, the Washington Commanders were expected to pick up KJ Osborne and add him to their team. He's only 27 years old, and he was hardly used by New England, like I said. So, I think he's still of value, and he can add a lot, really, to the Commanders that's desperately needing any sort of help on the wide receiver end of things. Because if you guys weren't aware also that their other wide receiver, Noah Brown, who was doing pretty well for them this year, he is presumably out for the rest of 2024, unfortunately, with a rib injury or some sort of internal injury. And he's not going to be able to go, if at all, for the rest of the year, or just for like several weeks. So they already needed help with Noah Brown there, but now that he's not even playing, I like this move. I think KJ Osborne, again, can add some sort of value to this offense, whether it be as a deep threat or as an intermediate guy, short route guy. I think the Commanders would take anything at this point. Heck, maybe Odell joins them. I don't know. Why not? Jaden Daniels is a great quarterback already, and I'm sure, the LSU connection's there. And a lot of guys would be dying to play with him. So maybe Odell ends up here as well, along with KJ Osborne. But I do like this move again. Cliff Kingsbury's looks like he's got things back running after a 42-point performance against the Titans. So any help that the Commanders can get, I would consider it as a great acquisition, and KJ Osborne fits under that. So I think that's going to be a pretty nice move for them to round out the receiver room. If that's the last thing they do, at least they got a guy in there like KJ to try and complement Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz and Daimi Brown and guys like that, right? So that was also, related to the Odell news just because of the position. Then we got another wide receiver, funny enough. Yesterday, the Kansas City Chiefs got great news for their offense as their wide receiver, Marquise Hollywood Brown, received the final medical clearance to now begin practicing, finally, for the Kansas City Chiefs. If you guys remember, Marquise Brown was signed all the way back in March. He was signed about 9 months ago, and it was looked upon as one of the great acquisitions, I would say. A guy that could take the top off the defense to complement Rashee Rice. Once they drafted Xavier Worthy also, the potential of seeing all three of those guys out there really got you excited. But then Rashee got hurt, Xavier Worthy is still a rookie, and Hollywood Brown suffered with a dislocated sternoclavicular joint in his shoulder. I won't try to say that again. He dislocated something in his shoulder, so he's been on the injured reserve pretty much the entire year. And there was some thought that he could come back in the playoffs, right, once they started. But now he's been ahead of schedule, and they gave him the medical clearance now, just for this week. The Chiefs are expected to open up his practice window, and he is obviously closer to coming back than not, right? And that's great news for them, right? Because we always talk about them being in these close games. We just talked about them in these close games. So the fact that they can have Marquise Brown as one of the guys coming back, they already had Isaiah Pacheco. He's looked pretty great. So having Marquise Brown, adding him to Xavier Worthy, having both of those guys on opposite sides is going to be a nightmare for opposing defenses. So this is phenomenal news for Patrick and for the Chiefs. Not only because, you got another receiver, but he's a veteran now, right? He's been in the league a good amount of years, so it's not like you do got to integrate him, but I imagine he's been involved with this offense for a pretty decent amount, at least on the sidelines and whatnot. So that's going to be huge news. When he returns, I expect this offense to look even more efficient and even more explosive when they got their guy back in there. So that's been great news for them. And then just lastly, I thought I'd mention the offensive line, give some love to the big guys up front, and mention how the Broncos and their top offensive lineman, Garrett Bowles, agreed to a new 4-year contract for the former All-Pro left tackle. Garrett Bowles, 32 years old now, was playing on the last year of his current contract, a 4-year, $68 million deal that was signed in 2022. And with this new extension, with this new 4-year extension, he's now signed through 2028, and he's able to continue blocking for the Broncos' new face of the franchise in Bo Nix. And, Bowles is 32 years old, so, there is that age, question, I guess you could say. But, he's been as solid as they come there, at least for them. So, knowing that you have a guy that you can rely upon, especially on the blind side of your quarterback, is absolutely massive. He's one of the cornerstones of this Broncos team. Him, Pat Surtain, and now Bo Nix, and even Cortland Sutton as well in there. So Garrett Bowles, he's staying with the Broncos for the foreseeable future, probably going to retire there, and he gets well compensated with his new 4-year contract extension. And with that being said, that's all the news that I wanted to kind of fit into today's show. Obviously, a lot of transactions going on, and you think about Odell potentially going to a new team and how he could impact that, KJ Osborne and how much of an impact he can make on the Commanders, and same thing for Hollywood Brown. All these guys could potentially make some pretty decent impact on one of these teams in the NFL, presumably a playoff team, and we'll see where it goes from here. But in the meantime, we got a couple more segments to get to. One story that I thought was interesting was regarding the Las Vegas Raiders and their owner, Mark Davis. He spoke at the annual December league meeting, and he brought up the future of his general manager and also his head coach, and also Tom Brady, and how much he wants to see Tom Brady be involved in the front office and really overseeing some of the football operations that go on with the Raiders. So we're going to give you guys more details on that when we return after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping back into the action quickly here for the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, we are going to talk about the Raiders a little bit more. We brought them up yesterday in regards to, their future and how they're involved with one of the top quarterbacks in the draft, Shedeur Sanders. Funny enough, the Heisman ceremony is happening tonight, I want to say, and yesterday or the night before that, Shedeur won a couple of trophies as well. So it doesn't directly have to do with him, but with the Raiders and how we brought them up, I thought it made the connection because now, obviously at the league meetings, everybody's present, or most of the owners are anyway, and the meeting was back on Wednesday, and I thought it was interesting that the Raiders and their owner, Mark Davis, spoke with the media about the short-term and the long-term future of the Raiders, right? Because in particular, the owner, Mark Davis, spoke about the new minority owner, Tom Brady, and his involvement going forward. And it might seem a little bit random, but what Mark Davis said regarding Tom Brady with the media on the league meeting was that he said, I want Tom to have a huge voice, no question about it. It's part of building the infrastructure of the organization. A football person that's not a coach or a manager, somebody that can oversee the whole picture, and I believe Tom, in time, will be the person that can do that. And also, Mark Davis was reported saying that he wants to see Tom kind of oversee the organization's entire front office, including the general manager and the head coach. I'm not saying, directly hiring these guys and just having Tom Brady pick whoever he likes, but just giving, his input, what he sees, what kind of impression he gets from these guys, because obviously he's been around an A-plus top-tier elite organization and how things are run in a well-oiled machine, essentially. So he has a lot to give out, a lot of help to give out to the Raiders, and that's something that I believe Tom wants to do, but the fact that Mark Davis said it as well, I think, is a good idea, quite honestly. And further reports from the Journal's sources say that there could be a lot of changes that could happen at every level of the organization once Tom Brady and Mark Davis work together more, once they get past, this initial phase of still, kind of getting integrated with everything, and being involved in this project that is the Raiders, right? Once they get more acclimated with one another, a bunch of sources say that there could be a lot more changes coming. And by that, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like in a year or two. It could be just this offseason, right? Where, we could be talking about decisions being made on the head coach and the general manager with their current general manager, Tom Telesco, and head coach Antonio Pierce. And on those changes, Mark Davis really wouldn't really wouldn't commit to Antonio Pierce as the head coach, going forward. There's about 4 games left, but they have a 4-11 record. And, it goes without saying that the Raiders haven't been good this year. Antonio Pierce had a pretty good end of the year last year, and he turned the culture around a little bit. He turned the morale around in that Raiders locker room, right? So that was a great thing to see, a great story. It gave you confidence in him that he really cared, and he really cared about seeing the Raiders succeed, so he got the job, and I think that's well-deserved. But now, after all of that, and, still having the confidence, I'm sure, of the organization, but you still have a 4-11 record, doesn't look great, obviously. So there are some questions there. It's not like he completely, just disregarded him as a head coach going forward, but he also didn't, praise him as either. So it's kind of still at a gray area, I would say, for Antonio Pierce. But they also said that, Mark Davis and the Raiders would reevaluate everything after the season, and I'm sure that's going to include Tom Brady as well, and on Antonio Pierce. See the kind of job that he's done, bringing in guys like Brock Bowers, and their second-round pick, I want to say, Jackson Powers-Johnson, has been pretty solid for them on the offensive line, but then everything else is still a bit of a struggle. So those two guys, Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco, have been really at the forefront of trying to build this team, along with, I'm sure, Mark Davis helping out, but it obviously hasn't, been what they had hoped. So those guys' positions are definitely, again, closer to a gray area than definitely just being reassured. And I do feel like, though, Tom Telesco is in a more positive feeling, just based on things that I've read. It feels like he's in a more secure spot than Antonio Pierce than I would say, but, you never know. But my standpoint on Antonio Pierce and just his future and things like that, I don't think the roster's kind of done him any favors, quite honestly, and it's not to disregard any sort of blame or responsibility that Antonio Pierce shoulders as a head coach, that comes with it, but also, I think not having a quarterback is obviously a huge problem. The team was going to be all right. The team was going to be decent or all right with an exciting young quarterback, potentially, if they drafted one in the first round. So the fact that they missed out by one pick on one of the top 5 to 6 quarterbacks that were selected in the first round, it's pretty unlucky. And everybody knew it on the day of the draft. Like, like, oh my God, can you imagine like the Raiders, like they wanted to get a quarterback and now they can't. They're the only team that needed one that didn't end up with one. But they got Brock Bowers at the end of the day, and he is probably going to make the Pro Bowl this year. So, did they really lose, getting a guy like Brock, but also not getting their quarterback? It's a weird spot to be because they definitely didn't think Brock was going to be this good. I mean, I think he's still leading the league in receptions. It's crazy what he's doing, and he looks like he's played for like 4 years now, and it's awesome to see for the Raiders. So at least they hit a home run with that pick. But I think that this year they're definitely going to need a quarterback, and that's why I was so adamant on Shedeur or even Cam Ward, right? He's still a great pick, but I think Shedeur just fits in Las Vegas a little bit more, and I think this year coming up should be where you decide on a final decision with Antonio Pierce, right? I think he's earned one more year based on, I mean, it's hard to say based on like the results or anything like that, but I think just the fact that it's still kind of like an unturned stone. It's kind of hard to put it into words because, you look at guys like, or teams like Washington and New England and how they found this whole new potential with a new, young, exciting quarterback, right? If the Commanders were where the Raiders were and, those two spots were flipped, the Raiders would be, I think, in a whole different spot where Antonio Pierce, if they had Jaden Daniels on their team and he was playing great, it would definitely earn him another opportunity. And I think he's bought himself just one extra year to kind of bring in a new quarterback, try to develop him, and see what this team can truly be when they have a leader, when they have a guy that they can rely upon, not just one of these guys that, no offense to Minshew and no offense to Aiden O'Connell, that aren't really the futures of this franchise. You can't put so much on Antonio Pierce to kind of have this team competing for the playoffs with backups and a roster that's quite honestly not there yet. So it was always going to be a long-term project, and I don't think it would be fair to just move on from Antonio Pierce after this year yet. So I think he's bought himself one more year, bring in a new offensive coordinator that gels with whatever new young coordinator or new young quarterback, that they bring in, and Tom Brady's going to be involved in all of that. I'm sure Mark Davis values his input and his comments, very highly. So I think and I hope Tom Brady kind of sees it the same way. And also for some people that might think it's weird or just like unacceptable, inappropriate that Tom Brady's helping this organization kind of, get back on their feet and helping them out in this way, I think would be dumb for the Raiders and for Tom to kind of not help each other, or for Tom not to help the Raiders. I think it would be dumb for them to not seek out his help. So I think that's a ridiculous thing to say for anybody that says like this might be inappropriate or that he shouldn't be doing that as a minority owner, and with the broadcasting at Fox, he shouldn't try and improve this team or give any input. I think that's all just nonsense. I'm sure this was part of why he got involved, and I appreciate also Mark Davis, being open to doing that. Not a lot of owners would, when they get like a minority owner, like I think Magic Johnson is a minority owner with the Commanders, right? And I don't know if Josh Harris allows like any sort of input, but a lot of old school owners and just these suits, as players call them, right? A lot of them don't allow for input, or they'll just kind of disregard what their minority owners say and things like this. So credit to Mark Davis for being open to it. He's no dummy. He knows he's talking to the greatest quarterback of all time. So he'd be foolish not to take that input if he really wants to make this team good. So I'm hoping that that sort of partnership ends up doing good things for the Raiders, because I think they're getting there. They're getting close, and I think Antonio Pierce is a good leader of men, and you don't find a lot of that in a lot of these new head coaches. A lot of them wow you with the scheme and everything in their results, but talking about true leaders like him, like Dan Campbell, like Mike Tomlin, those kind of guys, you don't find a lot of that. So I think that also still holds some value with the Raiders, and I would like to see Antonio Pierce continue as well. So we'll see where the Raiders go from here, but we do have one more topic to get to on a much larger scale. The NFL made an official announcement that they're going to go back to Germany in 2025, but in a new city. Find out what that new city is and where this international plan is heading with the NFL once we come back right after this. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Just thought I'd bring up kind of an old topic, but with some more current news coming up here. The NFL, back on Wednesday, we just talked about them having their league meeting. The NFL made it official back on Wednesday that in 2025, the NFL will feature an official NFL game in Berlin for the first time in history of the NFL. And we got Christopher O'Brien here. Antonio Pierce is gone. Dion taking over with Shador, and it would be an absolute clown show. They could bring Deebo Samuel too in a trade and walk out together with a boombox. If anything says Vegas, it would be what you just pointed out in that statement. Shador, Dion, Deebo in Vegas. It would be entertaining, 100%. But I mean, I kind of floated that idea before of Shador going there with his dad. A lot of people don't seem to be too big of fans of it. I like Shador. I think he's a decent quarterback, and I think just the personality is what it is. It's a problem when he's not playing well, and I think the performances have, warranted, some sort of, I guess, leeway, for a lack of a better terms, in that regard. If he's playing well and if he's throwing touchdowns, staying out of trouble and things like that, and if he wants to flex a Rolex or anything like that, I quite honestly would not care if I'm a fan. If he's winning games and doing everything he's supposed to be doing, staying out of trouble, he could do whatever he wants on the field, and things like that. It wouldn't bother me, but of course it all comes with the results. If he's doing that and they lose and it's not going well, then yes, the sentiment that it would be a clown show would definitely be valid. But I think Shador's going to do all right in the NFL, probably with the Giants or the Raiders, so we'll see. I don't think Dion's going to go, though. My hopes have been lowered in that regard, so I think it would be cool to see it, but I just also advertised for Antonio Pierce, so I can't play the fence. So I'm leaning towards Antonio Pierce now, unfortunately. But back to this topic on the NFL, going back to Germany, but for the first time ever playing in Berlin, Germany in 2025. The game is set to take place at the Olympic Stadium. The location, if you guys were soccer fans or if there was any soccer fans listening, the Olympic Stadium will be the location of the NFL game. That's where the Euros played their final, where Spain defeated England. In that stadium, that's where the game is going to take place. And this would mean that for the fourth season in a row, Germany would be awarded a regular season game in the NFL. So Germany is definitely building, a pretty good reputation there with the NFL, and the fans, just from watching it on TV, seem like they're into it, seem like they love it. So that's obviously the end goal for the NFL, getting this game to grow everywhere else. And it seems like Germany, it's been pretty popular over the last 4 seasons. Also, there's no further information like who's going to play there or, when would it be. But this has been something the NFL has been working on really hard to achieve. If you know this because last month Roger Goodell told reporters to actually believe the rumors about there being a game in Berlin. Usually he would be very monotone and just very saying a lot without actually giving you an answer, but he actually, backed the rumors and felt pretty confident that the NFL could have a game in Berlin, and, lo and behold, they got it. It's been announced they're going to have one there, and that's super exciting for the NFL to continue to grow their game. But also, he mentioned that it wouldn't stop there. I thought this was pretty interesting, where early last month, Roger Goodell said that they are still trying to increase the international games from 5 this year to about 8 as early as next year. And on that point, Roger Goodell said, "We are definitely going to Spain. We expect to return to Mexico City. We expect to return to Brazil, and we will certainly be back in the UK. And we're also looking at the potential of another game in Ireland, possibly." So, if they want to have 8 international games, that would be about half the season in the current format. About an international game for half of the season. I would say. So it seems like a pretty decent split if you broke it up that way. And I think that would be the max. I think 8 games, maybe 9 is all right, but anything in the double digits I think would be a bit too much. So if you keep it from 8 to 9 games per season in terms of international games, that seems like a pretty reasonable split. And I'm guessing Ireland is going to be the next location to kind of be announced here, because there's been a lot of hype and attention that's been getting, particularly from the Steelers and their good relationships over there in Ireland. I think the way they talk about it and the way Roger Goodell talks about it, and the fact that the Steelers really want to go play there, I have a feeling that they're going to get it done, and they're going to announce it probably at the beginning of next year, if I had to guess. So in that case, if there was an Ireland game, you can almost guarantee that the Steelers are going to be playing in it. So that would be one of their latest international games in recent memory. They usually don't play them. It's usually like the Jaguars or the Bears or something like that. But I have a pretty decent feeling that Ireland's going to be announced as one of these next new places over the next, few months here. So the NFL also hasn't been back in Mexico City. Roger Goodell mentioned Mexico City there, but they haven't been back there since 2022 because the Estadio Azteca has been under construction. So it looks like that construction is set to be finished by the beginning of next year, or by the time football season starts, the construction should all be done, because they've been going on since 2022, 2023. So that's the expectation, to kind of get back there. So I'm going to be optimistic about that as well, and think that Mexico City is going to be a location next year as well. So if we take all that information that we gathered from Roger Goodell and from just my own inclinations, I would say next year that we're going to have 2 games in Germany, in Berlin obviously, and also in Munich. I think those will be the 2 cities. Then the United Kingdom's always like a hosting city, so it'll be 2 in the United Kingdom. I think both in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, maybe one there and maybe another one in Wembley. There's going to be 2 there, 2 in Germany. There's going to be 1 in Spain. I've heard that it's probably going to be at Real Madrid Stadium, the Santiago Bernabeu, or I've also heard that it could be at Atletico Madrid's stadium, the Wanda Metropolitano. So it could be one of them. It could be one of those 2, probably Madrid, either one, as the 2 main stadiums. So the fact that Roger Goodell said that they're definitely going there, I'm going to say only 1 game is played there, as a new location. So that brings it up to 5. And then I have the return to Mexico City at the Estadio Azteca, that'll be another one. So that's 6. I have 1 in Ireland because I think that's just my inclination. I think they're going to get it done, especially with the Steelers and how big of a franchise they are. Playing in Ireland, they're going to want to get that done. So that's 7. And I think they're going to go back to Brazil for how big of an operation it was and how, I guess, big of a spectacle and a big moment it was for the first time in South America. Roger Goodell seems to be in good spirits about it. He had some pretty high praise about the game in Brazil and how everything went pretty smoothly, and the fact that Saquon went crazy as well. I have a feeling that they're going to go back there too. So if we round all of that up, we got 2 games in Germany, 2 games in the United Kingdom, 1 in Spain, 1 in Mexico City, 1 in Ireland, and 1 in Brazil. Almost all the continents would be hit. Kinda. You're still missing Africa, Asia, obviously, and, Australia, I guess, too. That would be another one that they could eventually get to, but that one's obviously a lot more challenging because of the time. But I think those are my predictions if I were to give one. But the biggest news, just coming this week was that Berlin has been officially, confirmed as one of the new cities. I expect Spain to be one, Ireland to be announced at some point in the coming months, and maybe a small announcement that they're going to go back to Mexico City. But I like the fact that 8 is a good number for them. And also, kind of a random, tangent here, but I like the fact that 8 to 9 international games is a good idea for the fact that in terms of expanding, the idea of the American culture, a sport that's so rooted in what the United States is, I think it's a good idea to do it this year, obviously, and then going into next year and a little bit, into 2026, because you're going to have a ton of people in the country for the World Cup, obviously, in 2026. So it's an opportunity to kind of, express the United States along with Mexico and Canada, obviously, but with a lot of the venues being in the United States, I think it's important to grow a sport that's native to the United States and that's so big over here, to grow it to different parts and kind of, share it with everybody else before, the whole world, converges here for the World Cup in 2026. I think the idea of the NFL spreading out to different places and kind of spreading the American culture is a good idea. So when people do come here, they kind of have a better understanding of one of the major sports and, the places and things like that. I think those kind of go hand in hand there. So all of it is just a ploy, to just try and get the news out there, spreading the game even more. And I think it's pretty cool, honestly, going to all these different places, but trying not to overdo it, obviously, for the players' sake. But, that was the last piece of news that we had on today's show. So I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media as well. And please remember, every weekday, the Chip Shot Football Podcast goes live at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure to join me, your host, Manny Maradiaga, each and every weekday to talk more about the NFL, more breaking stories, more discussions, more previews, and all that sort of stuff that comes with the NFL. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys back here again with me on Monday.